Okay, so we're doing database, like modifying databases with VBA, specifically getting you ready for the database modification project. I'm going to download both of these files, customers.mdb, that's an Access database file. Put that in my downloads, and then database insert 3, also in my downloads. Make sure I don't have that open. All right, well, let's go ahead, and you don't need to do this along with me. You can just kind of take a look at what we see here on the screen. But I want to start off just by taking a look at this customers.mdb file. MDB stands for Microsoft Database, and it's the old format for Microsoft Access. You make a new database today, that'll get saved with an ACCDB, Access Database extension. I'm using the MDB extension here. Just in case anyone's got an older version of Access, I want them to be able to access it, but it won't be long before that will be irrelevant. But it works just fine, works just the same once you have it open. There's only one table in this database. It's kind of a wimpy database. It's the customer table. If we open that table up, there are currently no records. First name, last name, address, city, state, zip. That's going to be our task today, is to be able to get data getting inserted into this database, and we'll do that and more. Okay. First thing I want to point out here is that there's a strange column here called cust ID. Look what happens in this cust ID when I put someone's name in here. Let's add Kevin Worthen. K-E-V-I-N, Worthen, W-O-R-T-H-E-N. You'll notice that I didn't type that 1 in there for customer ID, but it went automatically. This is a common thing in database management. Say, listen, I've got one column that has the value. I don't care what the value is, but it has to be unique. It can't have 2 records with the same value there. I'm going to turn over the maintenance of that column, that unique value, to the database management system. And so when I created this table, I said the data type for this is going to be auto number. Don't let the user type it in. Look, if I came here and want to change this, come in here and add in some more numbers or something, it doesn't even let me type them in. It's saying, listen, that's not editable by the user. So that's one thing that we're going to have to be able to deal with. And it's a common thing, so I want to point that out. And the rest of this is just kind of normal data. We now have 1 record in this table. I'll close. Maybe I'll leave this database open. It's okay. I can have the database open while I'm accessing it through Excel. That's the whole point of a database management system, is multi-user concurrency. I'm not sure if it's the whole point. It's a major point of a database management system. To be able to have several programs or several different people accessing a common data store simultaneously. So having the database open while I'm working on it in Excel, no problem. All right, I'm now going to open up my database insert file, and let's take a look at what we've got. So we've got a series of customers here that we want to enter the data. So that's where we're headed. But let's look at the code and kind of get familiar with what I've started you off with. So Alt F11, and let's take a look. Oh, one of the TAs emailed me. He said, whatever font you're using, people can't tell the difference between a comma and a period. So could you change to a different font? Yeah. Let me give that a shot. I don't know. That's the font that I've used a lot. What's that? So I've got lots of Microsoft Sans Serif. I guess maybe I can just go to the default Courier, even though it's hard to read because I'm zooming in anyway. Let's try Courier. Let's try Cyrillic version of Calibri. Let's look at the difference between a comma and a period in this. Plus. That's pretty different. Let's try this one. Is that okay? Yeah. That's better. Okay. While I'm there, I don't know why, because it seems to only work so very rarely. We'll try it again. If I can get the font to be a little bit bigger. Options. Bigger format. Did that do it? Oh! Miracle. Okay. I'm going to close down our Explorers here just so I have a little more screen estate. Okay, so we're looking here at the code we've got so far. This should look somewhat familiar from our last class. It's similar. Difference is we're using a different provider. And in fact, one difference is that instead of having the provider as a separate property of the connection, we're just bringing the provider in and making that part of the connection string itself. That's allowed. You can do that. And so we're using the Microsoft ACE OLEDB 12.0. What does ACE stand for? I don't know what ACE stands for. It's the new database engine that comes with Access. The old engine used to be called the JET, J-E-T, which is like the best example of coming up with a pretty good acronym and trying to figure out some letters that go with it. This is no ordinary engine, this is a JET engine. Formerly it stood for Joint Engine Technology, which was just, best they could do for JET. I don't know if ACE, if I was thinking of what ACE might stand for, I would probably just Access Engine. AC for Access and E for Informatica. Okay, now the data, for the data source, when we're connecting onto an Access database, we have to tell it the path to the Access file. Now, what am I doing here? I'm doing something magical here. What is it? We're saying, I don't care where the file is, as long as it's in the same location as the workbook. I'm saying, get the path to the workbook, and then we're going to concatenate on, oh wait, not University Prime. What's the name of our database? Customers. As you may notice, I copied this from the actual homework file. So it has the database name for the homework, but we've got to change this here to be customer, because that's the name of the database that we just downloaded. That's the one we've got to find. So this is going to expect that database to be located in the same folder as the Excel workbook that we're working on. And as long as that's the case, you should be able to find it okay. All right. So that's our connection string. Now, what we did before was we had a separate constant for the connection string, but this one, we're just using a string literal and putting it right here where we're opening the connection. Now, we'll specify some structured query language. We'll execute the structured query language using that connection that we opened, and then we'll close the connection. It's pretty short code. It almost fits on this very small screen. If I got rid of some of these comments, it would fit just fine. There's the whole sub-procedure is there. Declare the connection object, open the connection object, execute the structured query language, close the connection object. We're good. Questions? How many of you are looking at this and going, this is just mystical to me. I have no idea what's going on at this point. You kind of get the feeling we're okay with this. Okay? All right. Now, one thing that I thought about doing for us before we got here and decided against it, let's see what happens if I execute this. I'm going to execute this user-defined type not defined. That's not even a very good error message. Is this a user-defined type? String's not a user-defined type. Is this a user-defined type? I didn't define that. I'm using it. Why does Excel think it's a user-defined type? It's not stock. This is not a stock object. Remember, we're getting ready to do something with VBA that Excel itself is not capable of doing. We're going to edit data in a database. Excel doesn't do that. And so what we have to do is we have to instantiate objects that know how to do this. They're there. They're available in Windows. They're just not part of Excel. So how do we tell it which objects we want to use? It's to add a reference. So let's put a comment in here just before that one here that says, be sure to add a reference. Microsoft ActiveX ACTIVE data access objects. Maybe just data objects. So that is tools references. So I'm going to come up here and choose tools. Oh, I can't choose references while I'm in break mode, so I've got to stop my code. Tools, references. I got to scroll down to find the Microsoft ActiveX data objects. Oop, went past it. Microsoft ActiveX data objects library. Make sure you don't get the data object record set. It's an easy mistake to make. We're after the data objects. Once I've made that selection in this database file, I shouldn't have to make it again. It's just, we have to know that this file is expecting to have that reference. So the reason we have to do it right now is because what I did was I started with a brand new workbook. I copied the code from the project, plopped it in here, and then uploaded it. I didn't do this step when I was building this file initially.
How do you know to choose that one?
How do I know to choose this one instead of
2.8?
Oh, yeah.
There's like a million in there.
Okay, well, let's first look at these first 7, which are 0 through 1. They don't count very well here. It's 2.0, 2.1, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 6.1. So these are different versions of the same object. And so choose the most recent one you have. I don't think we're doing anything that would require us to use it, one of the newer ones. We could probably go all the way back to 2.0, and what we're doing would be just fine. So there are different versions of the object that kind of have improved capabilities as the objects evolved over time. But why don't I use the Microsoft Add-in Designer? The truth is, I Googled somewhere, and that's the one that it said to use. And so, yeah, is there a way to look into these and see what's in them? Yeah, Google's our only hope. I don't think that there's a way to just say, hey, we've got some object here. What does it do? What's inside of it? We don't know. That has to be documented by whoever's providing it. Yes?
So when you're kind of starting a new project where you're trying to figure out how to write a code that'll do something really complex, do you usually start by Googling it, seeing if somebody's done it before?
Oh, you're asking me my approach.
Yeah.
So the question. Let me just read the question. So, Professor Allen, when you're doing something really complex and you know it's going to be difficult, do you begin by Googling, or do you just kind of start hammering away at it until you can't get to it? The answer is almost always I start by saying, how would I go about this? And I'll get going, and then I'll get to something I don't know how to do. And then I will say, can I record myself doing this to get some code? That's the first thing I want to think of. If I can, great. If not, then I go to Google straight away. I was working with another professor, a very capable professor, setting up a Linux server to do something with Oracle. And we get to some error message. This guy's been a professor for maybe 10 years longer. Really capable guy. He's not a systems guy. And we got to the error, and he starts trying to figure it out. He's looking in the documentation for right there on the computer, and I was all, hey, how about we Google this error message? And he goes, I never thought of that. Really? Anyway, I hope he doesn't hear this because that was really weird. Yeah. Google the error message. So let's go to Google. So yeah. So it may very well be that I'm getting ready to do something that I don't even. I mean, I'm thinking of some new project, and I'm going. I could do 80% of this, but there's that 20% that I'm not even sure is possible. I might not do the 80% until I've Googled the 20%. Right, so is this thing that I'm getting ready to try to do, is that even possible? Oh, that might be possible. Okay, let's give it a shot. So,
and is that when you would stumble into adding this?
Oh yeah. So so for this very thing, I wasn't born knowing how to connect to a database through VBA. If you can imagine that. So in fact, when I was born, VBA didn't even exist. Bill Gates was in high school when I was born. He even created this thing. That's one of the few things that Microsoft ever created was the basic compiler. I mean, the very heart of the language we're working with, that's Bill Gates. This was code he wrote, the original stuff. Yeah, I probably just Googled it. How do you connect Excel, VBA? That's how I searched Excel, VBA, and then put whatever question I'm after. All right. All right, so we've added a reference. Now we've added a reference. So now I'm going to put a breakpoint on the connection. I should at least be able to get to that point. So now it doesn't complain here that it doesn't know what the ADODB connection is. If I run this, it should give me an error because I'm trying to execute SQL, and SQL right now has nothing in it. So I'll execute that. Couldn't find my thing. I'm in documents. I'm in documents. I'm not where I thought I was. I'm going to just save this in the right location. File, save as. I'm going to put this in my downloads, browse, download, save, place it, I hope. Run that again. Could not find it. Still can't find it.
Customers.
Oh, thank you. That's the problem all along. Customers.md. Try that again. I've got a different error. Command text was not set for the command object. It's because we're trying to execute this command that we've got here in SQL, and it's completely blank, doesn't know what to do. Okay. So let's take a look at what the statement looks like to insert data into this database. So I've got the database open. And you can see I've got first name, last name, address, city, state, zip. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to create a statement for that. We'll do it here in Notepad just so we have somewhere to look at it. So here's the statement. Insert into customer. Database is plural, the table name is singular. Now, a little shortcut that I could do if I'm allowed to enter values into all of the columns. If that's the case, I can say, you know what? Those columns are in order in the table. I'm just going to supply values in that order. So I'll say values. And I will put in customer number 12, comma, some first name, some last name. And then whatever else I'm going to give. But remember, that cust ID column, that first column, is an auto number field. I'm not allowed to insert value for it. And so instead, what I'm going to do, before I get to values, I'm going to tell it the columns that I can insert into. And so that's going to be first name, spelled exactly the way that it's spelled in the database. Last name. And I'm only going to supply the values for the columns that I've listed here in the list of columns. So far, so good? Now, I haven't supplied everything. It turns out, when I created the table in the database, I'm saying all this stuff, any one of these other columns besides that first one is allowed to be blank. And so, if I don't insert a value, it'll just be blank. In fact, in database lingo, it will be null. So null is an important idea. We'll talk a little bit more about it today. But null just means the absence of a value in a database record. All right, so I am going to take this statement, and actually I'm going to do this. Before I even get to VBA, I'm going to come over here to Access, and I am going to come to the Create tab, and I'm going to create a query in Design View. So here's where I'm creating queries. I can use the wizard or just create it. That's okay. I'll just create Design View. Now I don't want any of this stuff. It's trying to help me figure out how to make this. I don't need any help. I'll close that. You'll notice that if I haven't added any tables here, that I have an SQL option over here. Standard for Structured Query Language is the de facto standard for writing statements against databases. I'll select SQL View, and I will just paste that query right here. Now, the nice thing about what I'm about to do is I'm about to isolate this query. I don't want to have to worry. Is there a problem with my VBA? Is there a problem with my connection to the database? No, I've got the database open right here. I just want to execute that query. So I'll click on the little run button. So they have a syntax error. And that should be values, plural. And that's the whole thing I'm after here. Find the error that I have that's wrong with my SQL before I bring it into my VBA and have more complexity around it. So now I'll run that again because I'm about to append one row or rows. It's kind of amazing. It's not quite smart to figure out there's only one there and not put the S, but that's okay. I say OK. If I then come back here, I don't see that record. Well, I've got to refresh it. It turns out Access is not so bright to realize, oh, someone just inserted that data through a different channel, update what I'm looking at right here. But if I hit F5 to refresh that, then that record will show up right. So the first little trick here is to say, if I'm having trouble executing a statement, bring it into Access. Create a new query. Go to Create, Query and Design. Come to the cancel the table list. Come to the SQL view, paste your query in there, and execute it. And then you've reduced the potential things that could be the problem. If it doesn't execute here, it's a problem with the structured query language statement. Work on it right here until you've got it working, and then we'll bring that one back out and integrate it into our code. Go ahead and put it back here in case I want to come back to this one, which I will. Now I'll come to my code, and I'll plop that same query here in the SQL string. Now, the thing here is that this insert statement is a statement that is going to be interpreted by a computer. I am giving instructions to do something. But who's going to interpret that? Is Excel going to interpret this? No, Excel doesn't have any idea what to do with this statement. I've got to get this over to Access to be interpreted. So what is it even doing here in Excel? And the answer is, we are putting it here in Excel, but it's just going to be a string literal. It's inside these double quotes. What are these double quotes? Tell the interpreter here, the VBA interpreter. Yeah, they say, look, this is not for you to understand. Don't try to figure this out. You're not going to understand insert into. Just keep track of this statement, and we'll send it off to somebody else. VBA's only responsibility here is to hold this in place. And we might manipulate it. We might have it do some string manipulation to actually bring in a different first name, a different last name. But its responsibility at this point is just to keep track of the characters. And so that's why we're doing this within double quotes. It's just a string literal. Then when we say on our connection.execute, we're going to give it those characters that are in the SQL statement. And this connection object is going to take those characters and send them off to Access, where Access is going to be the one that's going to do the interpreting. So this is the first time we've done something like this. Typically, we're writing code for VBA to interpret. Now, we're writing code for VBA to interpret, but embedded in it, we're writing code that something else is going to interpret. VBA's got to keep track of it. It adds a different level of complexity. It's part of the reason that this is a difficult project. All right, I should be able to run this. Let's not do Gov Allen because he's in there now. Let's do my good wife, Nikki. I'll execute this with F5. Now come back and then refresh my data with F5 and F5. See how well that works? Let's do it. Try this again. F5. Execute. I'm setting it up. I'm finding it. That should be okay. I might be looking at the wrong database. Let me close this database and make sure I've got the right one. Let's see. Changes to this? No, not really. All right. Yeah. File save as. I'm in downloads. Okay. Make sure I've got my database from my downloads folder. Customers.mdb. And F5. Is that working for anybody besides me?
It's working for me.
Yeah, it's working for everybody but me. What's going on?
Let's look at your code.
Why don't you guys help me with this? Let me put a breakpoint there. You just check the path, what I've got here. What's that? Oh yeah, Cameron, TA. All right, so it's looking at downloads, customers.mdb. That looks great.
Does it insert into customers?
No, customer is singular in the database. So the name of the database is customers.mdb. The name of the table is customer. So there's the line. I'm going to execute that line. It really says it executed. Ending this sub procedure. We close this table, open it up again.
Refresh.
Well, there's not a whole lot to refresh. File, save as. Where is this thing? Save as an MDB. Save as. Yeah, close everything right there. See, this is saving in documents. So I'm going to save this over in downloads. Call it customers. You want to replace it? Wait, Microsoft can't replace an existing file as a result of converting out. Apparently, I clicked downloads thinking I was looking at customers. All right, I think that's the file I'm actually modifying. So let's cancel this. Let's close this. I mean, downloads for sure. We want to open it. Yes. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I had two copies of the database. I was looking at one with my code, looking at another one through the interface. So this one only has Nikki. I've added her 3 times. She'll be delighted. I'll tell her I added her more than anyone else in my class. And I will run this statement again. We should have 4 now. I'll refresh this. Oh, whew. I was about to be pretty embarrassed. Okay. I've added my wife now 4 times.
Can you write code to have it refresh in VBA, or is that?
Could I write code to have it refresh in VBA? The answer is yes, but it is a totally different thought than what we're doing here. So what we're doing here is we're just saying, use an object that knows how to get data into an Access database. Work with the Access data engine to get access in the database. If I wanted to, we're still coming up. I'm going to show you how to use VBA to remote control Internet Explorer. So you can say, open up Internet Explorer, send it to a web page, type in a username and a password, hit the enter button, go get some data and bring it in. So in that case, we're controlling a different application. We can do the same thing with Access. So we could say, hey, open up Access, write the data. We can still write the data the same way, but if we had a channel that we're controlling Access, we could say, open up that table, refresh that table. We would have access to do all of that if we wanted. But it's a totally different path than what we're doing here to get the data into the database. Okay, let's go ahead and extend out the query to be a fully specified query. So we have 6 things that we're going to give it here. Address, city, state, and zip. What's that?
So you going to tell us your address?
Sure. Here's my address. In quotes, 854 North, 1375 West. Oh, I'm going to even publish it onto YouTube. They're going to come after me. Provo, Utah. 84604. If you're going to send something to me, those of you in YouTube, you can send cash. I know they always say don't send cash to the mail, but I'm okay with that. Send it along. The important thing here is that I am supplying the values in exactly the same order that I've listed them. Now, I've listed these in the same order that they are in the database, but that's entirely arbitrary. I can put last name first. And now, when I put Alan here, it's going to go into the first name. It's okay, because actually Alan Gov would be a more common name than Gov Allen. Gov's more of a surname than a first name. So, the point is that I'm not tied to the order in which the columns exist in the table. I'm tied to the order in which I list the columns here. Question?
Yeah, so if you're typing SQL code in VBA, do you have to follow VBA syntax rules as well as SQL syntax rules? I'm just thinking in terms of like line breaks. In SQL, you don't have to do the underscore.
Oh, right. What you're saying is that an SQL statement can be across multiple lines.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're okay with that. Now, can a VBA line go across multiple lines? A VBA statement go across multiple lines? Yes, but there's some work you have to do. So let's go ahead and let's take that approach. Let's go ahead and break this onto 2 different lines. So now I have a carriage return character here. As far as SQL is concerned, no problem. And I'm going to bring this into my VBA now. I'm going to get rid of the insert statement that I had here. And I'm going to paste in that one. And you'll notice immediately I've got a problem. So I do have to follow. So as VBA looks at this, it has to say, all right, we've got to have syntax that we believe here, that we can understand. I can still break it onto multiple lines just by doing the little trick with the line continuation character. Now, if this was all one line, there's a problem. If I just come put an underscore and hit return, that's not allowed because VBA is going, well, wait a minute. You're starting a quote here. You're starting a string literal here. That's a valid character inside a string literal. That's a valid character inside a string literal. It hasn't seen anything that it recognizes as line continuation character. So what I've got to do is I've got to close off this string with a double quote. I have to put a space before that line continuation character. And then over here I'll say I want to add on to that, concatenate this next line. Let me do this without the line continuation so you can see it. So now I'm just saying I've got one string here, concatenating it with another string, not a problem. If I want that on 2 lines, space underscore, the end of the line will let me put that onto 2 different lines. So I can get all of that to show up here on 2 lines the way that VBA wants it. Now, am I passing it to Excel as 1 line, or am I passing it to Access as 1 line or 2 lines?
One.
Yeah, it's 1 line. What if I really wanted it to pass it with a line break there? How would I do it? could actually concatenate in a line break. VB, new line. There's a constant that does that. W, concatenate. So that looks VB, new line. Oh, I don't see the error here. VB, new line. I think that's what it is. Yeah, that's okay. So, oh, I don't need that. I've got 2 ampersands in a row. Yeah, I've got an ampersand down here and one up there. Perfect. So now I really am sending it a 2-line statement. There's a carriage return. Turns out, Access couldn't care less if there's a carriage return there or not. As long as I've got 1 space in there, I'm just fine. So that's why. But I can work that out either way. All right, so I'll execute this one, and it should reverse the order of my first name and my last name in my database. F5. So we've got now city, state, and zip, and it's put Allen Gov. That's question? Yes.
Were those values already populated into the customer row in the database, or did you populate last name, first name?
All these right here. Oh, you mean the columns?
Yeah.
Those, when you download the database, those were already there.
Okay.
So I built this customer table before I gave you the database.
Okay, so you're just populating.
I'm just putting values into it. All right, let's do a trick, folks. There are a couple of different ways that we could dynamically build this structured query language statement. I'm going to show you the way that I prefer, and if someone ends up asking about the other way, I'll show you the other way as well. So instead of having actual values in here, I'm going to put in just some tags. This is first, this is last name. I'll do it in all uppercase. I'll just do LN. Now, these angle brackets, these less than, greater than sign, they have no meaning to in structured query language or to any database management system. Let's see, this is address. This is city. It's only a convention for me as I'm working with this. This is state. ST, and this is zip. In fact, if I were to execute this, this should execute just fine. Let me go ahead and execute this. And then what we'll see is that it's taken that statement just fine. I mean, I told it, hey, this is a string literal, LN. And access goes, great. You want to put LN in the first name? I can do that. Those are characters that are allowed to go into that. That's just fine. So, I'm not quite done yet. What do I want to do next? After I've defined my string variable, before I use that variable to execute the SQL statement, what do I want to do? I want to look at this template that I've created and actually put a real value in here for last name, where I've got that last name tag. So I'll say SQL is going to equal something different. What's it going to be? Well, let's look at the replace function. We're going to replace, starting with SQL, so look at the SQL string the way it is. I'm going to look for something, and I'll replace it with something. So I've put some quotes in here just to get my syntax laid in, to make sure I get all my quotes and commas and parentheses in the right place. And now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say look for first name. Replace it with, oh, why don't we just do this? Cells, row number 1, column number, oh, I think our data actually has first and last name put together in one column. I've got Keith Conry here together. So how could I separate that? Row number 1, column number 1. What could I do to separate that? Ah, we could split it. So I'll split that based on a space, and then that'll give me an array, return an array. So I'll just take the 0th position. Whew, that is not simple. Here's the split function right here. I'm taking what's in row 1, column 1, splitting it based on a space. Incidentally, if I don't tell it which character to split on, what do you think it will split on? space. Yeah, this is optional. And if I don't specify, it's going to actually split it on a space. So just to simplify things a little bit, I'm going to get rid of that space because that's the default. So now I'm going to split this. It will split it based on the space, and I'm going to take the first element. Let's execute that. That should put Keith now into my database. So I've got Keith in there. The rest of these tags I need to do the same thing. So far, so good? So what I want you to realize is that it turns out that when you're building a structured query language, a dynamic structured query language statement, the syntax can get ugly if I'm trying to put the values that I want right in here, right? Because instead of putting this here, I could have just injected this right in there, right? This is Keith. And so I could have done this. Instead of tagging this at all, I could have just spliced in, and I'm just ending the string, starting the string again, and I could splice in that reference right there. That would work just fine. Why don't I do that? This is going to get hideous to look at. It's already pretty bad, like this. But at least this way, all these commas and these quotes, it's all SQL that I'm looking at. I've got something here I'm going to replace, but all the detailed syntax is all SQL. As soon as I try to inject the real values right when I'm creating that statement, I'm mixing VBA and SQL all on that line, and it gets to be a nightmare. And so even though this is a little bit more kind of processor intensive, it'll take a few more milliseconds to run this code. It is so much easier to write and maintain that I prefer to do it this way. So I've got first name. I'm going to just write these through and I'll take your question. So here's last name, address, city, state, zip, and I want to pull this from, whoops, this is going to be now column 2. I'm done splitting after those first two, so I probably shouldn't have copied that yet. Oops, and this should have .value on it. It works fine without it because value is the default property for a cell. I like to have it in there. City, state, zip, 2, 3, 4. Oh, this is 1 here as well. First two come off, then we start counting. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, there's a question here somewhere.
You have zip instead of zip.
That's because I'm really thirsty and parched from wearing the robe last class.
He's got a Mountain Dew.
If only.
No, not sharing.
Oh, is it caffeine free?
Why would it be easier just to sign up first and then do it? Why use the place?
Okay, so another approach that would be equally fine is to actually create, we could create variables. Define those instead of ln. I could actually create ln as a variable. And then instead of just putting text in here that I'm going to replace, I could concatenate that in. The reason I don't do that is because it mixes VBA syntax, commas, and quotes with SQL syntax. It gets really difficult to read. It's not impossible to read. And if you're very careful about the way you write it out, you might not ever have to read it. You might be able to get it right from the first time. But it's just, it is much more complex. It's a little bit safer. I'm going to show you a problem that could come up here potentially because you've got to guard against. Go ahead.
Your first and last name will those not just return the same value?
They will, unless I change one of these to say I want the second element to be given. All right, here's I'm going to do one more thing here. Before I execute this, or just when I'm done building this query, let me do a debug.print on it. Debug.print SQL. So now, just before I execute it, I'm going to print it. That will be helpful up here as I'm working with it. I'm going to execute this, see what it has. Oh, that was nice. I actually put a carriage return up in the statement, so when I printed it, printed the carriage return too. So now it looks like we've got this very well filled out. Keith Connery, you've got an address, city, state, and a zip. I like it. Questions? Yes.
So now we can just loop it.
Yes, you saw the loop coming. Good for you. Let's go take a look at Keith over here. Yeah, Keith's in here just fine. So yeah, next step, let's just go ahead and build a loop. So I'm going to declare a control variable, dim r as a long integer. I'm going to initialize, I don't think I have headers in my data, it's just a bunch of names. Yeah, so it starts on row 1. So I've declared r. I'm going to do it here after I've done the connection. Folks, it takes a second or so, half a second, to make the connection. And so I don't want to be opening and closing the connection inside the loop. Open the connection, loop through the data, insert a bunch of records, and when I'm done, close the connection. So I'm going to start my loop after I open the connection, do. I'll come back here and put the rest of that statement on there. And then after I execute, but before I close, I'm going to put the loop in here. And then I'll tab all this stuff in at least one level, maybe 2, so I can see it. I can see the structure. Do to loop. And I'm going to do until cells are, comma, 1 dot value is equal to a 0 length string. Well, got my dot value in the wrong place. Better make sure that I'm incrementing r, so at the bottom of my loop, I'll do r equals r plus 1, and I'll do a do events in case I accidentally put myself into an endless loop. So, out of a standard loop to loop across data, in this case, we're looping until we bump into a blank row. And now, instead of always looking on row number 1, I've got to tell it to look on row number r. So this really is pretty clean. I set up a template. I replace the tags in my template with values from the current row on the workbook. Then I execute the statement, move on to the next row, and do it again. Scroll down. Here's the end of the loop. I should be able to run this at this point and get an object-defined error. Where did I debug? Oh, I haven't set r to its initial value. R equals 1. So r's got to start at 1. Problem is, right now, what's r? 0. And I'm trying to go to row number 0. There is no row number 0. Excel complains about me telling it to go somewhere that doesn't exist. Subscript out of range. Am I still in break mode? Let's first of all see if that worked. Okay, so I entered all that in. I missed some of it. I got down to John Henry. Oh, subscript out of range. Yeah. Problems here at Molly. What's going on with Molly? Yeah, this is splitting. How big is the array that this comes back as? It only has 1. I'm talking. It's got a 0 element, but not number 1 element. Let's just go ahead and put something in here. Molly picture. And that should get us a little further down the road. Try that again. Oh, here's an interesting one. Let's take a look at this one. How do I get to that error message so you can see it? I guess I'll zoom in. Error message, syntax error. Missing operator in query expression. First of all, who is giving me this error? Where is this error coming from? VBA, or is it coming from Excel or from Access? It's coming from Access. You wouldn't really know it by looking at it, except that it tells us the errors in the query expression. Excel doesn't know anything about a query. Access knows about a query. What's the problem? Yeah, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this statement. Okay, so fortunately, I've printed this statement up here. Insert into customer. So if let's just think about Access as it's processing along here. Insert into customer, last name, first name. It's going just fine. Insert. It goes, reserved word. I got it. I know what that means. I'm expecting the word into to come next, and it sees it there. Great. It says, after that, I'm expecting a table name. It looks at this and goes, is that a table name? It goes and looks at its table and goes, yeah, it's a table name. Beautiful. And next, I'm expecting either the word values or a parenthesis. Aha! It's a parenthesis. What is it expecting now? List of field names. Is that a field name in this table? Yeah. A comma? Great. There's going to be another one. Hey, another one. It works. It works. It works. Closing parenthesis. I'm done with the field. It's so excited. Like, I got it. I'm expecting values. It says values right there. Opening parenthesis. I got it. Oh, look at this. It's a string literal. I love string literals. It comes in here. It's the end of the quote. That's the value to go to the first one. That goes into the last name. It gets to the comma. Goes great. We're getting for the next one. Open quote. I get to the C. Close quote. No problem. I'm expecting what? Comma. And I got an E. And it's going, I don't know what the E you're talking about. What is this? Right? So that's the problem, is that we've got what delimits the string as part of the data we're trying to insert. What do we have to do? We could change her name. Cecilia! In fact, I noticed this in the data. This is data I just copied from somewhere. Look at the next name here. I think that's really the same person. In fact, these addresses came from a different database than these names. So the address really isn't. What I did is just took a bunch of names. I said, remove the duplicates and just throw some names on here. Someone did that exact thing. They said, you know what? Celia doesn't really need that single quote in her name. We'll just get rid of it. Celia might not feel so good about it. Okay, so that's not a good solution. Getting rid of the quote's not a good solution. You might get by with it on a name. Do you think Celia sees her name without the apostrophe a lot?
Yes.
She probably totally does. And she's okay. But what if it wasn't a name? What if it was like a word? What if we're actually putting in some expression that's a word, and we're trying to do this? Wheel and a contraction. If we get rid of this, what do we have? We got a totally different word. It's not acceptable just to get rid of the single quote. So what are we going to do?
You tell me.
I'll tell you. Here's what the interpreter really does. It's coming along here, and it says single quote. Great, starting with a string. F, part of the string. R, part of the string. Y, part of the string. Another single quote. It goes, I think this is the end of the string. Let me be sure by peeking at the next character. And it looks at the next character and goes, oh, that's a comma. Yep, that was the end of the string. If, on the other hand, when it peeks ahead, it sees another quote, it behaves differently. Single quote. Single quote, start of the string. C, that's in the string. Single quote, I think this is the end of the string. Let me peek ahead and find out, the next character is another single quote. That's not the end of the string. This is just a quote in the string. That becomes a quote in the string. And then it gets to the E and goes, quote in the string, or character in the string, character in the string, character in the string. I think this is the end of the string. Let me take a peek and see. Aha! The next character is not a quote. That's the end of the string. And it moves on. It seems such a weird thing to me to do, but that's exactly what it does. So one quote inside the string is going to break it, but if I put two, it's A-OK. And it treats it like a single one. So, here, let's do this for right now. Let me put that as, we wouldn't really do this in the data. Let me put that right there, and we'll run it. That'll get rid of the problem. Then we'll see how we're really going to fix it. So I'll run that. It runs all the way through, no problem, no errors. If we come and look, we should see Celia in here. There's Celia, and you'll notice, where is she? 47. There we go. I'll put her under the microscope, under the magnifying glass. There's Celia. That doesn't really help. So you'll notice that even though in my data in Excel there are two quotes, when it ends up here there's a single quote. You got it? It's because that's how you get a quote inside of a quote, you put two of them. Folks, it works exactly the same in VBA. If I've got a double quote string and I want to put a quote in it, I just put two double quotes right next to each other. VBA does the same thing. It's kind of a common way of handling a delimiter inside of a string that's delimited by that character. I still think it's weird, but that's the way it's done. So obviously, well, I don't want to say obviously. The truth is, we don't want to have to go in and edit the data here because that data is going to come to us, typed in properly. We'd like to be able to treat it the right way. So to do that, we're going to create another function. So in my code, I'm going to come down here, I'll make another function. Well, I'll make a function, we don't have a function. I'm going to call this function prep SQL. I'm going to pass it some data as a string. It's going to return as a string. Do a couple things here. Let me dim a variable called temp as a string. We're going to do some more advanced things besides. I'm getting ready for the things we're going to do that's a little more advanced than what we're doing right now. I'm going to say temp equals. I'm going to look at data. Whoops. Temp equals. I'm going to replace. I'm going to look at data. I'm going to look for something, replace it with something. So right now, I've just put my syntax in here. Look at data, comma. So I'm looking for some string. I've got the quotes in. I put the string. I just put the quotes in to say I'm going to be looking for a string here. Replacing it with some other string. Close the parentheses. The reason I put those in to start off with is that this is going to look really weird. What is the string I'm looking for? A single quote or an apostrophe. It's the same character. So I'm going to put that right here. Inside, I've got my double quotes already. My opening and closing quote are there for my string literal. I'm going to plug in a single quote. On the inside, it looks kind of funny. There it is. What do I want to replace it with? Double single quotes. So right in here, 2 of those. That looks weird in this font and almost every font I've ever seen this in. But that's how you do it. That almost deserves a comment. Oh, look, it's a single quote. That's something different here. Replace REPLACE single quote with 2 single quotes. Ooh, what happens if we have some strange name that actually has 2 single quotes in a row? What if we, I don't know if anyone really has a name like that, but I can imagine there being some string somewhere that's got to have 2 single quotes. What's that going to do? It's going to put 4 quotes. Is that going to be okay? Let's look at the first one. Let's go, I think that's the end of the quote. Oh, no, it's not the end of the quote. It's just a quote inside the quote. Let's see the next one. Oh, I think that's the end of the quote. Is it? Nope, it's not the end of the quote. Yeah, it'll be just fine. That will be just fine. All right. So now all we have to do is return that. So we set the name of the function equal to temp. And we should be now in business. All we have to do is prepare the SQL string as we're putting it into the SQL statement. So I don't want to run off from this too fast. Have you got this function okay? Does there anyone need a little bit more time with this function before I go and actually implement it?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Did you do it in 5?
I did.
Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. So the idea here, I send it down the string, and it's going to send back the string, but with the single quotes change to 2 single. Any single quote change to 2 single quotes. So now, instead of, here's what I'm going to insert into it. Instead of that, I'm just going to send that function down to prep SQL. I haven't told you why we call it SQL SQL. It's an interesting story. I don't have time for it, but when you see the 3 letters SQL, it's always appropriate to say those rather than 3 syllables, to say it in 2 syllables, SQL. There's a reason for that. That's, what I'm going to do is do it right here. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get ready to put it back here. I'm going to call prep SQL, opening and closing parentheses, and then inside that I'll put the same thing that I had before. And I'm going to do that for every single one of these that's a string. So now, if there's a quote in the name, no problem. It's just going to modify it so that the SQL that I'm executing has the quotes there properly. Questions? Suppose we didn't know the zip code for somebody. see, how do I get small? Let's suppose that Scott Morris here, actually Scott Morris was the guy in Sacramento. I stayed at his house once, and I went out and taught a class. Let's suppose for whatever reason, we don't know what Scott Morris's zip code is. This is an important thing that we have to handle correctly in the world of database management. Right now, how are we going to handle that? What is that going to what is the insert statement going to look like for this one? I'm just going to put a break point before I execute it after I've printed it out. Oops, mismatch, split. Oh, really? Pref SQL, this split is probably going to return a variant. And I'm telling it it's got to be a string. Easy way to do that is just change this to variant right now. There's better ways that we could do it, but let's just get this going. I think that'll be okay. Okay, so if we have not specified a zip code, this is going to look like this. We are executing into this database a zero-length string. And that's a bad idea. Let me go ahead and execute that. We're going to run this one out, and we're going to get Scott Morris with no. We're going to get Scott Morris with no zip code. Let's come back and look at the data. Now, I think I entered some folks at the top here. Now, up here, when I entered Nikki Allen, I did not specify a value at all for address, city, state, or zip. Right? I just said first name, last name, give them a first name and last name. In so doing, I have told the database there is no value for the zip code. Let's see how we actually ask for no value. I'm going to create a new query in design mode. Just write the SQL statement. Select star from customer where zip is null. That is the database lingo way that you say there is no value for that. I'm going to run this. And we do not see Scott Morris. And yet, if I look down here to Scott Morris, I don't see it here. Oh, thank you. Refresh. Ah, there we go. So here's our Scott Morris here. There's no zip code. Why, oh why, doesn't he show up when I said showing the folks with no zip code? Because he has a zip code. It's really, really short. It's a zip code with no characters. It's a zero-length string. And a zero-length string is a string. It's not the absence of a value. It is a string. So what we've got to do is when this happens and we've got a zero-length string here, we don't want to put a zero-length string. What we want to put here is the SQL reserved word NULL. Not inside of quotes. If I put it inside of quotes, what would it insert? NULL. We don't want that. We want no value at all. Ugh. But fortunately, we've already got this prep SQL that's examining what we're getting ready to pass in there. So let's do this. Let's just say, after we've done our first replace, if data equals a zero-length string, then, we'll do temp. If temp equals a zero-length string, then temp equals NULL. So now we send down a zero-length string. It looks at it and goes, oh, it's a zero-length string. Return NULL. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
But okay, so if your temps equaling replace data,
Yes.
so how you like using that you're using it again?
Ah,
So I'm confused.
so data comes in here.
So we're using temp to replace, like if it's a quote, right?
Right.
And now we're using it again to say if it's blank, then make it null.
Right. Let's think through what happens if I send down a zero-length string. Data starts as a zero-length string. Temp is going to equal zero-length string. Look for all the single quotes, replace them with two single quotes. Does it find any? When data is a zero-length string?
No.
No. And so what is temp going to equal after this? Temp will be a zero-length string. So when I get to this one, if it started as a zero-length string, it's still going to be a zero-length string. But you're right, we could use data right here. This would work as well. Because if data comes in as a zero-length string, temp will be a zero-length string after this line. Since I'm playing with temp, though, I prefer to see it as temp. There are kind of other ways that we could write this that might make a little more sense. Because of zero-length string, there's no reason for us even to do this comparison. So maybe we should do it with an else if and whatever, but let's just kind of treat these as separate processes. Okay, let's run this, and we're going to see something that's not quite desirable, and then we'll see how to fix it. So we'll run that. Now let's take a look. I'll refresh our data. Look down here to the bottom and find good old Scott Morris. What has happened? It has put the word NULL in there. I wonder if I can find it here. It's probably where you can see it. I should be able to get to it. Aha, here it is. Scott Morris. See what I did? Why are the quotes there? Did I put single quotes around it? Down in the function? There's double quotes here because I have to get those characters. Turns out null is a reserved word in VBA as well. I can't just put null outside of quotes because it means something different. Where are the quotes coming from? Right here. Here's the problem. I need the quotes there if it's not a zero-length string, but if it is a zero-length string, no quotes allowed. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of all the quotes from in here. All these single quotes, gone. Remember, I'm running all of these values and I'm getting ready to replace this here through prep SQL. So I've gotten rid of all of the single quotes. And now, if temp is blank, then temp equals null. Else, temp equals a single quote concatenated with whatever's in temp, concatenated with another single quote. Instead of putting the quotes in the template, I'm saying whatever value we're going to replace those tags with, wrap the quotes around that. This way, I can decide here if the quotes belong on or not. If this thing is blank, if what you sent down was nothing, I need no quotes, just NULL by itself. If it's anything else, I got to have those quotes in. Whew, run this again. Refresh again. Let's look down at the very bottom, find Scott Morris. Now there he is with no zip. Questions?
So what does that last one do again? Sorry, the last else temp.
Right here?
Yeah.
So what this is doing is this is saying, if you send me down a zero-length string, I'm going to send you back the keywords NULL, no quotes around it. If you send me back anything else, then I'm going to give you whatever I've calculated that to be by this point, and I'm going to put single quotes around it. I've got to have those single quotes around here, but they're not in the template SQL anymore.
Okay.
And so this is going to put those single quotes back onto that.
So it's just everything.
Yeah, this is what generates each one of these closing quotes. That one, this one, this one. All right. This should be enough to get you going. There's a couple of other gotchas specific to this. What we've seen so far is just kind of like general. Anytime you're writing SQL to go into a database, there are things you have to think about. There's a few now that deal specifically with the assignment. We've got 5 minutes. Let me at least point those out to you. So this is a project called Database Modification. Have I downloaded this? I don't think I've downloaded this assignment. Preview. I download the data. I probably do have the data already down here to extract it. Alan. We did this for another example like two classes ago. Crime, here it is, okay. Let's just open up a couple of these. Let's look at Texas. Texas is a pretty complex one. Your job in this assignment is to open up this file. There's 48 of them. To open up each one of these files and compose an SQL statement to insert the data. One row is going to look like this. You got to read this and say, hey, this is in Texas. This is from 2001. This is for Abilene Christian College. And the word is enrollment. You got to put that number. You got to build an insert statement that will do that. The good news is, in the definition of the assignment, I give you the template already. The insert statement is kind of pre-built for you. So you'll start with the template I gave you, and then you'll just say, I've got to figure out how to get these in. You've got to insert hundreds of statements just on this page alone, because that's one insert statement there. One insert statement for murder, one for rape, one for robbery, one for assault. A couple things to notice here. One is that violent crime is a summary of these next 4 columns. You don't insert the violent crime. It's not raw data. Don't insert violent crime. So take a look at the data. There are 9 data fields. There's enrollment, murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. Those are the 9. So this property crime is a summary. Don't use it. Don't insert it. Violent crime is summary. You're going to skip those. There's a couple of gotchas here. First of all is that you've got to figure out when to stop. Good news, folks. You can always start on row 6. But when do you stop? They're not all the same length. How do you know when to stop? You can't just go till you hit a blank row, because in any one of these rows, you might have a blank row where the data is just not known. That's the way we've normally done it. And you can't just start from the bottom and come up till you hit data. Why? Well, that one might be missing. The very bottom one might be missing on any one of these rows. What are you going to do? Oh, there's 3 in a row. I don't think that's going to help. Here is the only reliable way that I've seen to be able to know when you're out of data. Is to look for that border right there. Look for that border. There's a border at the very top. Here's the caution. If you look for the border at the bottom and stop when you get to the border at the bottom, you'll be okay. But typically what will happen is you'll get down here, and you'll go, oh, border's at the bottom, I'm done. And you'll miss the last line. And so it might be safer to stop once you get to a border with a top, because that border there is the same border as the top border on this side. The problem with that is, when you first start, there's a top border here. So you've got to make sure that, okay, the top border, and I'm not on row 6, then I'm done with the data. A couple of other gotchas. One is this. That cell's merged. It's going to get ugly. Here's what I recommend. When you open up this file, when your code opens this file, unmerge all the cells. Like just select all of this. Control 1. I've taken some notes. Control 1. When you say us, I hope you mean you're not working together on the assignment. Control 1. How do I get there? Oh, thank you. Select all the cells. Control 1. Alignment. Unmerge. Okay, so now they're not merged, but I don't know which these are for. But that's okay, because as you're coming down, you go, okay, I'm on Texas A&M University. Oh, that's blank. What am I still on? Still Texas A&M. If you want to, you can actually fill those values in. You can fill these down, but I would just remember which one you saw last. Okay, next problem. Let's look at a different one. Let's look at Utah. As we look at the Utah data, there's something fundamentally different about it in its structure. What do you see? Column B over here says campus. Well, that means, when we get down to Texas A&M, we got 6 schools here, and they're all different. They're all Texas A&M, but they're different campuses. Over here in the Utah data, we've only got a handful of schools, and none of them have campuses. So what happens to the campus column? Poof, it's just not there. If I were doing this, I would open this file, I would immediately look at B5 and say, does that say campus? And if it doesn't say campus, insert a column right there. So that you know that enrollment's going to be in column C. Now, you're making these changes to the files. You're not saving the changes you make to these files. You're just saying, hey, open it up. I have to modify it so my code can read this well. That's okay. And then when you close the file, just don't save it. And we'll go back to the way it was before. Just imagine if you saved it and you open this file again, what would happen? I'm going to look in B5. Does it say campus? No. Insert another column. I've just replicated the problem by pushing it off to a different location instead of having it started. One other thing that might be helpful, depending on your approach, may or may not be helpful, you'll notice that the labels that you have to put into the database for these numbers, they're shorter than this. This is just murder. This one is just assault. Actually, I think it's spelled wrong in the database. You can spell it consistent in the database, or you can spell it correctly. That's fine either way. You might come in here and actually change this to the label you want to put in the database. You just kind of write those there, and then as you're building your queries, you can look there to pull in the right value. There are other ways to do that as well. Last thing. The instructions say, do not enter a value. Don't enter a record if there's no numeric value. All right, if I look over here, what does it mean? And that's blank. Student enrollment's blank. What does that mean? We don't know what that is. There's no reason to enter that data. All the rest of the data in the record are just giving context to the number. There's no number. Don't enter that. Tell me, is there a number right here in D11? Yeah, that's 0. Is that a value? That's a value. So you should insert this one. Insert it for 0, but if it's blank, don't insert. Here's the good news, folks. When you make your first submission, if you have anything wrong, it will tell you exactly what's wrong. It'll say something like, I expected to find 12 records where the state was Utah and it said arson. And so it's telling you what you've got to have to be able to get it right. So take a close look at what those error messages are and make sure that your new code produces exactly the right numbers. You should be able to get full credit on this. Unless what? Unless you wait too long. You don't have time. Any questions? Thanks for coming. Class dismissed.